Hi there, in this video I'm going to find out whether having high shutter speeds really does reduce the detail in your photographs. So this video was brought about basically because I've been getting lots of comments recently about people saying how high my shutter speeds are when I'm taking photographs of static objects, and one in particular went into a lot of detail about how higher shutter speeds can reduce the detail, and it was sort of intuitively sensible because if you've got faster shutter speeds you're letting less light into the camera, so therefore you possibly could get less detail. Now, it's not something that I've noticed, but I stand to be corrected, and that's what I'm going to do in this video. Now, the Z8 does give the ability to shoot up to shutter speeds of 1/32,000th of a second, and it handles ISO really well. So what I've been doing is I've just been setting aperture priority, setting an ISO of something that I feel comfortable with. Usually it's about 1,000, and that gives me a really nice fast shutter speed, and I've not had any problem with that so far. But we're going to sort out in this video whether it really does affect the details in your photographs, and I've got an experiment planned that should sort that out. So hopefully in this video I'm going to make sure that I can carry on enjoying my photography. So I've set up the experiment here in as fair a way as I possibly can. I've got the camera locked off on a tripod, and OLED, my model, who you might recognise from my ISO video, is set up waiting to have his photograph taken. But I've chosen OLED because he's got a lot of fine detail in the fur around the nose. So that should all be fair. Now, I've chosen a nice sunny morning so I can really get the shutter speed high. To ensure that I can get the highest shutter speeds possible, I've chosen an ISO value of 2000, and just to make sure everything else is as fair as possible, I've kept the same aperture at 7.1, so I've got quite a good depth of field. I've also using a self timer, so I'm not introducing any camera shake, and I'm manually focusing on the same part of OLED, so every shot is going to be exactly the same. So I've taken one photograph with OLED with no filters on the front, and that gave me a shutter speed of 1/8000th of a second. I've then introduced a 6ND filter, and that's taken the shutter speed down to 1/1250th of a second. And then I've introduced my big stopper, which is a 10 stop filter, and that's taken the shutter speed down to 1/8 of a second. I've come inside onto the computer, and before I can actually compare the images, there's several things that I need to do. First of all, I need to run each image through noise reduction software, just so I've got no noise that's been introduced from the ISO of 2000. Now, I did talk about that in my previous video where I went over how far I could push the ISO, so I'm not going to cover that today, but I do use DxO Pure Raw as my noise reduction software. Now that I've run the images through the noise reduction software, I've opened all three of them in Camera Raw. Now, I have already done this process, so you won't be able to tell any difference between the images themselves, but basically what I did was just fine-tuned the exposure. So in these first two, if you look at the exposure, they're almost the same. I've just lifted the exposure on the first one because I did slightly underexpose so I could get the shutter speed a little bit faster. And then on the final one, because of the filter that was on the front, it was difficult to get an exact exposure, so I've just lifted the exposure on that one as well. The other thing that I've done is match up the colour temperature, because in the first two you can see that the colour temperatures were virtually exactly the same, but with the 10 stop filter on the front, then it did introduce a slight blue tone. So I've lifted the color balance just here, lifted the temperature to make it slightly warmer so it matches the other three. But those are the only things that I've changed in Camera Raw. Then what I've done is I've opened all of those images into Photoshop. On screen at the moment is the full size image. Now I'm going to zoom in to the nose area of the cuddly toy because that's the area that I've focused on, because there's a lot of detail in the fur around the teddy bear's muzzle. Now we'll start with the image that was taken at the shutter speed of 1/8000th of a second. Now I don't know how well you can see this on YouTube, whether it's cutting out any detail, but on my screen it looks absolutely perfect. I can't see any degradation in any of the detail of those fine hairs around the nose of the teddy bear. It is really good quality. No problem at all with that. So it would have to get really so much better at the slower shutter speeds to make any difference at all. So let's change to the 1/1250th of a second image, and if I flick between the two, other than the slight misalignment, which I've tried to get as close as possible, there is no difference in quality. And I've studied this in quite a lot of detail, and if I flip between the two, I just can't tell any difference, and there's no noticeable difference in quality of those fine hairs, and I have looked very carefully. And if we go to the 1/8th of a second, again, there is no difference at all. Again, nothing that I can detect. And if we flip between the 1/8th of a second and the 1/8000th of a second, no difference again. There is no loss of quality. It is just as good. And so that comment that I got on fast shutter speeds reducing quality seems like it's either something that other people experience with different cameras, or it's just a bit of an urban myth. I hope you found that experiment interesting. I certainly have. I will carry on using whatever shutter speed the camera gives me, because this experiment has shown me that the details are not affected really by the shutter speed. I couldn't tell any noticeable difference. Now it might be different for other cameras, so there could be a difference between mirrorless and a standard DSLR. That might cause a difference. If your camera handles ISO in a different way, that might cause a difference. So do your own experiments, come up with your own findings and make up your own mind. But I certainly don't think with my Z8 that the shutter speed affects details in any way. Well, I hope you've enjoyed that video, and if you have, let me know down below in the comments, or nip over to my Instagram or Vero account, that's @Oakden Leave me your comments there, and you can also see lots of my photographs. Now, if you like what I do on the channel and want to help support me to make future content like this, then you can leave out the gift shop. That's at Teespring. There I've got a range of merchandise on offer, so head off over there, because a purchase really does help me out, and it's very much appreciated. But you don't have to spend any money at all to support the channel. You can do that simply by clicking the like, subscribe and the bell notifications. It really helps me out, and it makes sure that you don't miss out on any future content. Watch out for next week's video. That goes live on Sunday. In the meantime, go and check out this video just up here. But all that's left now from me and OLED is to say, stay safe, and I'll see you soon.